Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are the new Soviet infantry for World War II from Warlord games. Now these fellas I bought myself, these weren't actually supplied to me by Warlord, so I can say what I like. But same as always, they're actually really cool. We'll have a quick look at the sprues themselves, talk a little bit about the kit, and then get straight into the painting. And I've got two different methods for you today. I am going to mention a couple of times that other methods will work just fine, so the description is going to be loaded with bits and pieces to go and check out, but let's keep it nice and simple. As always, all of the paints listed for both of these guys will be down there too, so let's get started. So we'll start off with a real quick look at the sprues themselves. Now, there are much better and higher quality photos of these on the Warlord Games website, so if you do want to see individual pieces, go ahead and check those out. I just think it's worth having a quick look and comparing some of the bits and pieces here. So same with most of the plastic infantry, you've got 5 frames of these and there are 6 bodies on each. The poses on these guys are a little bit more active, meaning that they are running or moving a little bit more than some of the things like the recent German veterans or even the airborne, which came along recently. They're quite intense, they're on the move. There's enough rifles to give everybody one, and off the top of my head, I think that's true of the SMGs as well. You've got a mix of Soviet and a couple of captured German examples, which is pretty cool, very thematically appropriate. Things like packs, greatcoats rolled up and what have you. Something that surprised me, and I think you might have seen at the start of the video, was how well the greatcoats actually rest over the plastic miniatures. Sometimes these sort of glue-on accessories, they don't quite fit right, they don't sit in a way that looks natural, but these, I gotta admit, I'm pretty impressed. You also get, of course, a shed load of heads, not a head load of sheds. One or two really cool things about this set. They do highlight on the instruction sheet, there are 3 heads that are sort of specifically meant to give your unit a Siberian veteran flavor. And something I really like about them, it's probably a bit easier to see them on the photos on the website, but they do have slightly broader cheeks, more pronounced noses and what have you, so they do have a different look to them. They do look like they are from further east than the rest of the basic dudes, which is pretty cool. Also gives me some hope for the revamped Japanese plastics whenever they come along. I'm looking forward to those as well. These, yeah, I think they're going to do a pretty good job on those as well. Also, you have got a couple of female heads. So for things like snipers, radio operators, buglers and what have you, you have got the option of including them too. Very cool. There's also a bunch of NKVD heads too, if you do want to put a bunch of utter sods on your table. But there's also the officer cap there too. Now, honestly, short of how they're painted, I can't see a huge difference. I'm just not aware of a big difference between the NKVD caps and the officer caps. Somebody might know better than me, but I think you could happily paint these up as officers and no one's going to really call you on it. It'll look fine. Now, one thing I really do like about the kit as well is that not only do you get a light machine gun in a firing pose, but there's also one being carried. So you've got a couple of options there, and the anti-tank rifle is there too. It would be nice if there was a firing pose for the anti-tank rifle, but given the fact that putting one of these guys down prone and having to adjust how his position is, how many parts are actually on the frame and what have you, might start getting a little bit tricky trying to fit that on there too. But having it in plastic so you can bung a whole load of them into your platoon, that's kind of cool. There's also the funky things like satchels, stolen chickens, and all that. So it's a really flavorful little kit. And like the recent German veterans, you've also got the bases and a few extras on a separate frame. So you have got the mine dogs, if you want to include them in your army, and a couple of these capes if you're going to do Soviet scouts or snipers. Very cool little additions. I've used one of the open hands on one of the guys you'll see today, and a couple of extra ammo pouches. So all told, I think it's a pretty cool kit. Definitely the best plastic Soviets that are out there, but the competition on that front's maybe a little limited. The one thing that I did notice, and it is kind of a downside, is that out of the box, there were 2 frames which did have quite pronounced mold lines. Now, that wasn't the case with all of them, and it certainly hasn't been the case with a lot of the other recent plastics that have come along. Just, in the interest of transparency, I did get a couple which are going to take a little bit of extra time to clean up and assemble. But other than that, yeah, price is right for a box of infantry. So let's get on to painting them. So starting off with the fella that we're going to paint with all of these one-coat paints, I am going to go through this rather quickly because I have actually discussed color choices and all that using these one-coat paints in another video with the why and the how and the color choices for the uniforms and what have you. So rather than repeating myself, I will link to that in the description and we'll just rock on through this relatively quickly because the miniature might be a little bit different, but the uniform itself, well, it's the same uniform. It hasn't changed. So I've started by priming him in Brainmatter Beige. Now previously I have used Wraithbone from Citadel. You could also use, I believe it's Bone White from VALLEJO, which is a little bit between Skeleton Bone from the Army Painter and Wraithbone from Citadel. The Brainmatter Beige is probably the lightest of them before going up to white. I'm using the beige because I want just a little bit of warmth to things like his skin and his uniform. So starting off with his skin, I'm going to use Dwarf Flesh. This is one of the VALLEJO Xpress paints, and I'm using this one because it was the first one that I reached. You could quite happily use Gilliman Flesh, Peachy Flesh, any skin tone from these sort of one-coat ranges. It's really up to you. Now for his uniform, still using VALLEJO Xpress, I have here Battledress Brown. Now this one is technically for British uniforms. However, it does also work very well for Soviet uniforms. You're in the era of grubby browns, so you can't go too far wrong, especially just eyeballing it like this. So other contenders might be Agros Dunes or Brownish Decay, but this is what I'm using because once it dries, it's going to look the business. Now, I do tend to find it a little trickier to apply the Xpress range than some of the other one-coat paints because they have a tendency to bubble quite quickly if you are trying to apply them very, very fast. But it is still a very quick method, so be mindful, take your time, and you'll be fine. What I have here is Wasteland Brown, and I'm going to use this to paint in any wooden details. So on this fella, it's literally just the stock on the machine gun. But rifles, entrenching tool handles, that sort of thing, Wasteland Brown or something like it will work fine. If you need to, you can grab a little bit of Brainmatter Beige from the pot and straighten out his straps and equipment if you need to. Because in a second here, we're then going to use Khaki Drill to paint in any of the cloth details. So the strap and his bread bag, we'll get a dose of this. And anything like backpacks, if your fellas wearing them, anything that's going to be, khaki cloth. You can also experiment with adding a little bit of green to this if you prefer, because that will also look quite natural. Now we are going to jump around just a little bit here and start applying the black. Now what I'm going to use is Black Legion from Citadel. This is the darkest and most solid of any of the one-coat paints that I've come across. So I kind of like it. The only way that you could get a more solid black would be to use a traditional acrylic. All the same, I like how this one applies. So over his boots, and as well I'm going to apply this over the machine gun. Now if you have applied the wood color over a rifle, for example, you're not painting a machine gunner, what you can do is paint this straight over the wood color as well. So definitely one to have if you do like using these one-coat paints. And then for any leather details, what I'm going to use is Mahogany. Now you can use anything you like here for a dark leathery sort of color, so satchel brown or similar will also work quite nicely. It's up to you. And now the last thing to really do on this fella is to paint in the star on his pilotka, and I'm just going to use a little bit of pure red for that off screen. If you do have a dude where you need to paint his helmet, what I'd recommend, stay tuned, and paint it in the same way as I do on the other fella, using traditional acrylics. Now that's mostly because I quite like painted metal and such like that to be a slightly more solid finish than a one-coat paint would give us. All the same, once I'm finished with this fella, I'm going to pop him aside, and we will move on to our second dude, because we're going to base them at the same time. So for this fella here, I've started with priming him with Skeleton Bone, again from the Army Painter, but any medium to light primer will do the job. Could even be a grey. It's not going to matter too much by the time we're finished. Now, following on with the idea that the uniforms were not all that different from the British in colour, what I'm going to start with, this is Mid Battledress from the Army Painter again. This one is from the historical line. Comes in the British paint set, funnily enough. And you see I'm not being too terribly careful about how this goes on, because it's a little bit easier to tidy our overrun and our mistakes than it is if we're painting with the one-coat paints. Now, a similar color to this is actually Prairie Ochre. So if you can't get your hands on the historical range, then Prairie Ochre will see you right. It's just a little bit lighter and a wee bit more yellow than this is. I think I might actually need to swap my brush for this. So, once this one has dried, I might give this a second coat, see how this turns out. Now that will take you a couple of coats to get a solid color, particularly on flat areas like his sleeves and what have you. All the same, once you finish with that, I have Moonstone skin here, and I'm going to base coat. Well, I'll let you guess. Likewise, this is probably going to take a second coat over the first, and when you come to any helmet straps or similar, just go straight over them. Now, working in a slightly different order on this fella, I'm going to use Oak Brown to paint in the dark, leathery stuff. Now, of course, how much of this is actually on your miniature is going to depend a little bit on how you assembled them. But I am putting this on now because it's going to be easier to go over this with our canvas color than to be careful applying it once we've got the canvas on. So, this first. Then for the canvas details, I'm going to use Dusty Skull. So straps on most of the weapons, the cover on his shovel, and of course the cover on his water bottle. Now for those of you fellas that you have assembled with the greatcoat tossed around their shoulder, what I'm going to use here is Leather Brown. Now you may notice I'm actually quite closely following a lot of the suggestions in the painting guide from Warlord that comes on the assembly sheet. So it's actually a pretty good resource if you want to just follow along with what's on the sheet. You won't go too far wrong. Now once all of those soft details are finished, what we're going to do is a quick dry brush to introduce a bit of texture. Now what I'm using here is the Army Painter's small dry brush. I like the little wedge tips. And I have here some light Battledress, which is the next color up for, funnily enough, the Battledress colors from the historical range. You want to be fairly light going on with this at first. Under ordinary circumstances, I would probably use here something like Dark Sand from VALLEJO, but because I have used that in a previous video, I just want to demonstrate other choices are possible too. So, trying to catch the edges, creases, folds, and what have you in all of his uniform first and foremost, and then very lightly over the greatcoat to give that a bit of shape as well. Once you've gone around once, just let that dry and settle, and you can come back and give it a second quick pass anywhere that you need to. Now at first that's going to look a little bit chalky, but that's perfect. Once we've washed and varnished this dude, that's all going to come together. But there might be a couple of bits where you've probably added a little bit more than you might want. What I would suggest is that for your basic infantry, don't worry about coming back and doing this step. What I've done is to thin down some of that mid Battledress again, and I'm just using it as basically an undo button. Anywhere that there is too much of the dry brush, I can very quickly shimmy in there with a bit of my thinned down stuff and just tidy up. However, like I said, for your basic guys, you're probably not going to notice this. So it's nice to know how to do it if you have to, but I'd suggest you're probably not going to need to. I just realized I hadn't hit record. So what I'm going on now is, this is strap grey, and this is just off black. It's very dark grey. This one, if you want an alternative, something like Corvus Black from Citadel, or what is it, German Grey from VALLEJO, which is kind of ironic considering what we're painting. But anything which is going to be black, give it a coat of this now. Now while that dries, because this fella is carrying an SMG rather than a rifle, it's worth pointing out you'd probably be better to do any wooden details first before doing that black step. All the same, what I have here, this is Ruddy Terror. This is from the John Blanche range from the Army Painter. But any wood color that you choose, over the entrenching tool handle, over his rifle, and then what you can do is come back and pick out with the black, what the actual weapon parts are going to be. And for the helmet on this chap, I have Midnight Olive. This one's another one from the John Blanche range, but Woodland Camo will work perfectly well. This is slightly lighter than this. And of course, any of the other colors that I've used in previous Soviet guides will work just fine as well. US Olive Drab, even something like Refractive Green. There's not really a right color here, just a dark Army Man green will do the job. Now once that has dried, what you can do is grab your base coats again, do any tidy up that you need to at this stage, and then we're going to go ahead and shade them. Now what I've mixed up in my palette here is equal parts of Strong Tone, Soft Tone, and Speed Paint Medium. Now the reason here is that the Strong Tone is going to give us most of our shading, the Soft Tone is going to add a little bit of warmth and some yellow to the color scheme, bring out some of what's in the uniform there. And the Speed Paint Medium is just going to make it easier to apply without settling too heavily anywhere. So once you've applied it, pop it on, give it a couple of seconds to see how it settles. You can shift it around with your brush. Oh yeah, this is nice and simple. We're going to cover the entire miniature with this. Any big clodges like that you get, that's where you want to bring your brush in again and shift it to somewhere a bit more useful. So over everything, and once it has dried, we'll see what we end up with. And then you should end up with something that looks like this. Now this is a little bit darker than the previous Soviet infantry that I've done, but that's a deliberate choice. I just wanted to show you there are other colors that are going to be accurate for these guys. Now what I'm going to do is get rid of some of this actually, it's too much on my brush. I'm going to use here Barbarian Flesh to paint over most of his skin, and leave just a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. And to finish off his skin, what I have is Dorado skin here, and I've thinned this down just a little bit more than I usually would with my skin tones, because what I want to do here is pop just a little bit on his nose, cheekbones, and his chin. I want him to still look kind of round. Then what I'm going to do is pop a little bit of this on the back of his knuckles too. I'm going to now return to that light Battledress from earlier. What I'm going to use this for is just a tiny wee bit of it on areas where I might have missed with the dry brush, but I still want a slightly sharper edge to my highlights. So along his collar is a good spot for this, along the edge of his sleeves. It's easy to go overboard with this very quickly, so once you've popped a little bit on, just hold your miniature at arm's length, get a feel for what it's actually going to look like. But yeah, a wee bit of this just to differentiate some of those edges. It's going to look pretty cool. Obviously, they're quite different to one another, but the finishing touches are going to be the same. What I'm going to do is take them outside and hit them with a matte varnish so that we don't have quite the same shine in the recesses, and it will also bring together some of our shading. I'll also finish off the bases, and there's one last thing I want to show you before we get to that. So we start by admiring what the varnish does to the miniature. Much, much nicer. And then I've got a 2B pencil. The softer the better, so a B or a 2B works perfectly well here. I'm just going to use the edge of it to buff along the metal work. A question that comes up fairly regularly is, isn't it better to do this before varnishing? The short answer is no. Reason being is that the varnish actually creates a surface which, as well as diffusing the light slightly and getting rid of that gloss, gives our pencil a little bit of graphite, something to stick to. Unless you really rub it with your thumb, you're not going to rub it off during casual play. And honestly, if you do, it's probably going to look a little bit more realistic anyhow. So, yep, let's go ahead, chuck our base on them, and have a look at what our fellas look like once they are all complete. And so, there at last, our Soviet soldiers are complete. And I think you can see there is quite a difference between the two styles. Obviously, the fellow that we have speed painted is a little rougher, I want to say, but it's not so much so that if you were to paint a whole army that way, it wouldn't look fine. Same too with our more traditional speed painting guy. He's a little bit darker than usual, but that look, it's kind of cool. A splash of red or two on some of the other pilotka there would really help sell that look. And I think the miniatures themselves actually lend themselves to a speed painting method. There's enough physical detail on them to either catch a dry brush or those speed paints or quick shades, whatever it is you're using, they will look great. So as well, I'm going to make sure that in the description there are the other Soviet painting guides because, I mean, it's Soviet infantry, the miniatures themselves don't matter too much, the methods will all work just fine. So thanks goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.